The humid air of Louisville, Kentucky, in the dying days of September 1992, clung to Private Mark Jensen like a second skin, a thick, almost palpable blanket of moisture unique to the Ohio River Valley. The relentless summer heat was finally relenting, its oppressive grip loosening to allow the crisp, hopeful promise of autumn to seep into the city's historic brick facades and tree-lined streets. Mark, a diligent and unassuming 22-year-old soldier, found a certain comfort in the rigid, predictable routine of military life at Fort Knox, yet his youthful spirit yearned for the small, precious freedoms afforded on weekend passes. Hailing from a small, economically struggling town nestled in the rolling farmlands of northern Ohio, he'd enlisted in the United States Army 2 years prior, propelled by a profound desire for stability, the promise of an education through the GI Bill, and most significantly, a chance to provide a markedly better life for his beloved mother, Eleanor. He was fiercely independent, yet deeply devoted to his family. A substantial portion of his modest private's pay found its way home each month, a silent, unwavering testament to his commitment and the quiet burden of responsibility he carried. Mark's off-base apartment, a somewhat cramped but functional two-bedroom unit in the working-class, vibrant Germantown neighborhood, was his personal sanctuary, a welcome respite from the stark, impersonal barracks. Shared with another private, Dave Keller, it was usually a hub of camaraderie, cheap beer, and the occasional boisterous game of cards. This particular Friday evening, October 2nd, 1992, was no different in its initial promise of normalcy. Mark had plans, a familiar Friday night ritual that anchored his weeks. He'd just received a cherished letter from his mother, its pages filled with the mundane yet comforting news from home, alongside a gentle, handwritten reminder about a small, pressing debt he was diligently helping her to repay. He'd carefully folded the letter, its edges softened from repeated handling, and placed it securely in his worn leather wallet, a tangible piece of home to carry with him. "You heading out, Jensen? Another night at O'Malley's?" Dave called out, his voice a low rumble from the living room, where the flickering, ethereal blue light of a rented VHS tape, probably an action movie, washed over his face, casting shifting shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of stale pizza and yesterday's coffee. Mark grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dim light, and adjusted the collar of his faded but clean denim shirt. "You know it, man. Carla's working, and she practically swore on her grandmother's grave she'd hook me up with a free pitcher if I brought a crowd." Carla, a lively, good-humored waitress at the bustling Irish pub on Bardstown Road, a bustling artery of Louisville's nightlife, was more of a friendly acquaintance than any serious romantic interest. But her legendary generosity with the taps was an open secret and a powerful draw among the Fort Knox crowd. Mark appreciated her easygoing nature and the simple, uncomplicated friendship they shared. "Good luck with that," Dave chuckled, gesturing with his own half-empty can of Budweiser. "I'm on duty early tomorrow morning. Don't get into any trouble, Jensen. You know how Captain Davies gets about even a hint of a late return." His tone was light, but there was an underlying understanding of military discipline. "Never do," Mark replied with a carefree shrug, his words echoing with youthful confidence as he grabbed his keys and the wallet containing Eleanor's letter. The solid click of the apartment door shutting behind him seemed to seal away the mundane, familiar scene, leaving it untouched, a snapshot in time. It was precisely 8:07 p.m. O'Malley's pub was, as expected, a vibrant, throbbing entity, a warm, inviting refuge from the cool autumn night. It was a boisterous symphony of laughter, the rhythmic clinking of glasses, the murmur of countless conversations, and the insistent, driving thrum of classic rock Lynyrd Skynyrd's iconic "Sweet Home Alabama," blasting with joyful abandon from the well-used jukebox in the corner. Mark, with his easy smile, found a relatively clear spot at the long, polished oak bar, offering a friendly nod to Carla as she expertly navigated the dense, undulating crowd, a tray of frothy beers held aloft. He exchanged pleasantries and shared a few anecdotes with other soldiers, tales of demanding drill sergeants, the mundane drills, and the sweet anticipation of upcoming weekend passes. He consumed a few beers, savoring their crisp coolness, but nothing excessive, always mindful of his duties. The evening unfolded with the predictable rhythm of a typical Friday night. Around 11:30 p.m., Carla, momentarily catching her breath behind the bar, distinctly saw Mark engaged in what appeared to be an animated, though not overtly aggressive, conversation with a man she didn't immediately recognize. He was a stocky individual in a dark, slightly ill-fitting jacket, older than Mark, perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s, with a noticeable receding hairline and a distinct, almost imperceptible limp. They seemed deeply engrossed, their heads closed together near the back exit, an area often used for quick smoke breaks. She thought little of it at the time. O'Malley's was a melting pot, a place where strangers often struck up conversations, and Mark, after all, was an exceptionally friendly person. By 1 a.m., Mark was gone. Carla, engrossed in the ceaseless demands of her shift, simply assumed he'd made his way home. His friend Dave, however, upon returning to the apartment in the pre-dawn hours, immediately registered Mark's absence. His bed was neatly made, his crisply ironed uniform still hanging in the closet, a silent accusation. Mark's small side of the refrigerator, usually stocked with leftovers, was untouched. No hastily scribbled note. Dave, initially unconcerned, called Mark's military unit on Saturday morning, assuming his friend had simply decided to crash at another soldier's place or perhaps taken an impromptu road trip, a youthful indulgence. But when Mark failed to report for Monday morning formation, the casual concern that had lingered in Dave's mind escalated rapidly into a cold knot of dread. Private Mark Jensen was officially reported AWOL, absent without leave. His commanding officer, Captain Davies, a gruff, no-nonsense veteran with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol, initiated the standard military procedure. A formal, chilling phone call to his emergency contact, his mother, Eleanor Jensen. Eleanor was a woman whose strength was carved from years of quiet perseverance and an unwavering, fierce maternal love. Her voice, usually soft and melodious, hardened instantly, cracking with an edge of raw disbelief and pain when Captain Davies delivered the sterile official news. AWOL, no, that's not my Mark, he wouldn't just disappear. He's always been responsible, always called, something's terribly wrong. Her maternal instincts, ancient and primal, screamed a warning, a terrifying premonition that cut through the polite, formal military jargon, leaving her breathless and cold. The military police at Fort Knox, led by the diligent but constrained Sergeant Barnes, launched what was, by all accounts, a perfunctory investigation. Their focus was inherently narrow: confirm AWOL, then move on. They dutifully checked Mark's apartment, interviewed Dave and a handful of other soldiers Mark was known to associate with. The general, disheartening consensus within the military command was that Jensen had simply decided to skip out, to desert. It wasn't an unheard-of occurrence, though it was less common for a soldier so close to his next promotion, a fact that Barnes privately found troubling. Mark's bank account showed no activity since Friday morning. No outgoing calls from his landline after he left for O'Malley's, which was meticulously checked by the phone company. And critically, no car to trace. He typically relied on walking or the city bus system, making his movements harder to pinpoint. Without a vehicle, there was no starting point for a wider search. Eleanor, however, from her small, neat home in Ohio, utterly refused to accept this dismissive narrative. Her son was not a deserter. She began making frantic, desperate calls to Louisville, to Fort Knox, to anyone and everyone who would spare a moment to listen. She contacted the Louisville Metro Police Department, LMPD, but they were initially hesitant to get deeply involved. Mark was an adult, a serviceman. Their jurisdiction felt murky, overlapping uncomfortably with military authority, and without any immediate, tangible evidence of foul play, the case was largely treated as a routine missing persons report that the military was already handling. Detective John Miller, a jaded but fundamentally decent officer with a decade of experience navigating the city's underbelly, was eventually assigned the thin file. He made a few obligatory calls, paid a perfunctory visit to O'Malley's, but found nothing concrete. Carla, the waitress, remembered Mark and vaguely recalled the conversation with the older man, but her memory was hazy, unable to recall specifics that could serve as actionable leads. The omnipresent surveillance cameras that now lined virtually every street corner and business facade were a distant, futuristic fantasy in 1992 Louisville. The bustling pub, like most businesses, had none. The crucial moment of Mark's interaction slipped into the ether, unrecorded. Eleanor, driven by an unyielding maternal imperative, traveled to Louisville herself, her face etched with an unbearable worry, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed and swollen from sleepless nights and endless tears. She bypassed the official channels, becoming her own one-woman search party. She plastered missing posters bearing Mark's vibrant, smiling face, a cherished photograph taken at his high school graduation, radiating youthful optimism on every lamppost, every bus stop, every community bulletin board she could find. her hands shaking slightly with each application. She walked the unfamiliar, bustling streets of Germantown, a stranger in a strange city, talking to Mark's neighbors, pleading with indifferent shopkeepers, showing his picture to anyone who would meet her gaze. She rented a cheap, threadbare motel room on the outskirts of the city and steadfastly refused to leave, convinced that if she stayed, he would somehow find his way back to her. She spoke to Detective Miller repeatedly, her pleas growing more desperate, more heart-wrenching with each unanswered question. "He wouldn't just abandon me, Detective," she'd sob, her voice thin with anguish, clutching a faded, crinkled photograph of Mark as a small boy, full of life and mischief. Miller, a father himself, felt a deep, empathetic pang for her raw suffering, but his hands were tied, bound by the bureaucratic limitations and the glaring absence of concrete evidence. The trail was already cold, barely a week after Mark vanished. The initial, fleeting buzz surrounding Mark Jensen's disappearance quickly faded. News cycles moved on. The case, lacking new leads, slid inexorably into the growing stack of cold files. The military, after a few agonizing months, officially declared Mark a deserter, a devastating blow to Eleanor, not only erasing his honorable service, but also all the hard-earned benefits he was diligently working towards. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering became a fresh, agonizing wound, a stark reminder of his absence. She kept his Germantown apartment rented for a full year, clinging to a desperate, irrational hope that he would simply walk through the door, offering an explanation for his prolonged absence. His friends, other soldiers, gradually moved on, transferred to new posts, or deployed overseas, their memories of Mark slowly softening with the relentless march of time. Detective Miller, with a backlog of active cases, was reassigned, though the image of Eleanor's tear-streaked face stayed with him, a quiet burden. The Louisville riverfront, a place where Mark sometimes went to clear his head and watch the slow, majestic flow of the Ohio River, was searched, as were parts of the sprawling, beautiful Cherokee Park, but both yielded nothing but the city's indifferent silence. The vast, sprawling metropolis, with its hidden alleys and forgotten corners, had simply swallowed him whole, leaving no trace. Years bled into one another with a chilling, monotonous regularity. 1993, 1994, 1995, the Gulf War had ended. The economy was experiencing seismic shifts, and the world spun on, oblivious and uncaring, without Mark. Eleanor, her spirit battered but unbroken, eventually returned to her quiet home in Ohio, but her heart, heavy and fractured, remained irrevocably tethered to Louisville. She maintained a small, reverent shrine to Mark in her living room, a collection of cherished artifacts. His graduation photo, slightly faded, his old dog tags, their metal cool to the touch, and the stack of letters he'd diligently sent her from basic training in Fort Knox. She called Detective Miller every few months, a solemn, agonizing ritual of despair. He would offer polite but increasingly empty reassurances, the ache of his own professional failure a quiet thrum beneath his words. He never truly forgot Mark, nor Eleanor's unshakable, fierce belief in her son's character. The Internet, a nascent curiosity in 1992, accessed primarily through slow, screeching dial-up connections, had by 2001 transformed into a burgeoning, interconnected global network. Eleanor, despite her initial apprehension, slowly learned to navigate its bewildering complexities. She painstakingly created primitive online forums and message boards dedicated to missing persons, posting Mark's story, a digital ghost in the vast, impersonal machine of the early web. She joined nascent online support groups for families of missing persons, finding a profound, unexpected kinship with others who understood the unique, soul-crushing agony of not knowing, of living in a perpetual, agonizing limbo. Each news report of discovered remains anywhere in the country sent a jolt of ice-cold terror and a sliver of desperate, flickering hope through her fragile heart. Could it be Mark? Each agonizing time, the answer was a definitive, soul-crushing no. The years were a relentless tide of hope and disappointment. The year 2001 brought with it a different kind of autumn to Louisville, one tinged with the promise of relentless progress and urban transformation. On the eastern outskirts of the city, near the winding, often neglected path of Beargrass Creek, an area historically overlooked and prone to flooding, a derelict, severely overgrown plot of land that had once housed a ramshackle, barely functional auto repair shop and a forgotten junkyard, was finally slated for ambitious redevelopment. A new, sprawling shopping complex, ambitiously named the Creekside Plaza, was scheduled to rise from the forgotten dust. On the crisp, clear morning of October 17, 2001, almost exactly 9 years to the day Mark Jensen had inexplicably vanished. A powerful bulldozer, operated by a burly, experienced man named Gus Hemlock, rumbled across the property. Its massive steel blade bit deep into the soft, rain-soaked earth, churning up not just soil, but decades of forgotten debris, rusted metal, and generations of refuse. The air filled with the earthy scent of disturbed soil and the metallic tang of old rust. Gus, a man hardened by years of demanding physical labor, was nearing the end of his shift, his thoughts already drifting to the promise of a cold beer and a hot, comforting meal. He felt a sudden, distinct jolt, a resistance beneath the heavy machinery that was different, more stubborn than the usual rocks or ancient tree roots. He instinctively backed up the powerful machine, repositioned the blade, and pushed again, exerting maximum force. This time the earth gave way to something unnervingly, sickeningly familiar. A human skull, partially exposed, its empty eye sockets staring blankly at the rapidly fading twilight sky, seemed to emerge directly from the soil. Gus, a veteran of countless construction sites, knew with chilling certainty what he had found. He immediately killed the roaring engine, the sudden, absolute silence that descended upon the scene even more deafening than the machine's roar. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. Within minutes, the site, bathed in the eerie glow of emergency vehicle lights, was swarming with police officers, their radios crackling with urgent commands. The grim discovery brought Detective Rachel Vance, a sharp, methodical, and recently promoted officer from LMPD's revitalized cold case unit, rushing to the scene. The entire area was meticulously cordoned off with bright yellow tape, floodlights illuminating the macabre tableau, casting long, dancing shadows. Forensic teams, working with meticulous precision, carefully sifted through the disturbed soil, using brushes and trowels to unearth bones, fragments of faded clothing, and heartbreakingly, a scattering of personal effects. The remains were largely skeletal, bleached by the elements and time, but remarkably nestled amongst the vertebrae. A military-issue dog tag was found. Its tarnished metal bore the name JNSEN Mark A. The date of birth stamped beneath it, 1970, chillingly confirmed it. Mark Jensen, missing since October 1992, had finally been found. The realization sent a shiver through even the most hardened officers. The news, delivered by a solemn Detective Vance, hit Eleanor Jensen like a brutal physical blow, a concussive wave of overwhelming relief and agonizing despair intertwining, tearing at her soul. Her Mark was found, but he was dead. The long, torturous nightmare of not knowing, of living in a purgatory of unanswered questions, was finally, irrevocably over. Yet in its place rose the crushing, immutable reality of what happened, of a future irrevocably stolen. She collapsed, the phone clattering from her numb fingers, the silent scream echoing in her mind. Detective Vance's team, invigorated by the breakthrough, worked tirelessly, their dedication fueled by the 9 years of silence. The clothing fragments, meticulously pieced together, included remnants of faded blue denim and a patterned t-shirt, entirely consistent with what Mark was last seen wearing. A few rusted coins, a half-smoked pack of an old brand of cigarettes, and most poignantly, a single, water-stained but remarkably preserved black and white photograph. Mark's mother, Eleanor, younger, smiling faintly, were also recovered. The most critical piece of evidence, however, was the skeletal remains themselves. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the city's highly respected medical examiner, conducted a thorough, painstaking analysis. Her findings were chilling and definitive. A clear, distinct blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a severe, crushing blow from a heavy object. It was unequivocally a homicide. The old case file, thin and gathering dust for years in a forgotten cabinet, was now dramatically resurrected, its brittle pages handled with new reverence. Detective Vance meticulously reviewed every detail from 1992, every scribbled note, every dead-end lead. She re-interviewed Dave Keller, who was now a married man living a quiet life in suburban California, still visibly haunted by his friend's inexplicable disappearance. His testimony, though unchanged, now carried a different weight. She painstakingly tracked down Carla from O'Malley's, who was now a grandmother working at a diner in southern Indiana, her once vibrant pub stories replaced by tales of grandchildren. Carla, after a moment of intense concentration, vividly recalled the older man Mark was speaking with that night. Her description was more detailed this time. Stocky build, receding hairline, a dark, ill-fitting jacket, and a distinctive, noticeable limp. She also mentioned he seemed agitated, even aggressive, though Mark himself appeared calm and collected, perhaps trying to de-escalate. Vance shifted her focus back to O'Malley's. The pub had changed hands multiple times over the years, a testament to the fleeting nature of Louisville's nightlife, but the old police reports, sparse as they were, detailed who owned and managed it in 1992. Through diligent research in old property records, she found a former bartender, now long retired and living a quiet life in Florida, who, after several phone calls, remembered the man Carla described. His name was Roy Pincer Peterson. Peterson, the former bartender explained, was a notorious low-level enforcer for a small-time, often brutal gambling ring that operated clandestinely out of the back rooms of several establishments, including O'Malley's. He was infamous for his explosive temper, his intimidating presence, and his method of collecting debts, often with a heavy hand, bordering on outright violence. He also fit the physical description perfectly, including the distinctive limp, which the bartender confirmed was from an old, brutal bar fight injury that never quite healed right. Further, more intensive investigation into Peterson's shadowy history revealed a disturbing pattern. A string of petty crimes, multiple assault charges that often mysteriously disappeared from court dockets, and a brief, 6-month stint in state prison for aggravated battery in 1997, a period during which he'd attacked a man over a card game debt. Crucially, in late 1992, immediately following Mark's disappearance, Peterson had abruptly and completely left Louisville, vanishing for several months before resurfacing in an entirely different state, a move that now appeared highly suspicious, almost a flight. He had returned to Louisville years later, but by then, Mark Jensen's case was deeply cold. Detective Vance's theory began to solidify, piece by chilling piece, like a mosaic forming in the dim light of cold facts. Mark, a diligent young man who carefully managed his finances and sent money home, had likely been celebrating payday, perhaps with more cash on him than usual that Friday night. Or perhaps in the lively, sometimes chaotic atmosphere of O'Malley's, he had unwittingly overheard a sensitive conversation, a hushed exchange related to the gambling ring. Or perhaps he had simply rebuffed Peterson's aggressive advances, or bravely stood up for another vulnerable patron, and Peterson's explosive, hair-trigger temper had flared with deadly force. The grim location of the body was highly significant. The old auto shop property was a notorious, unspoken dumping ground for local petty criminals, a convenient, out-of-the-way place where problems could be buried and forgotten, especially before the area saw any major civic or commercial development. They tracked Peterson down. He was living a quiet, almost deliberately unremarkable life in a secluded, dusty rural town in Alabama, a pale shadow of his former aggressive, violent self. He worked as a general handyman, his days filled with small, innocuous tasks. Vance and her small team traveled there, a long, arduous drive through the heart of the South, a journey that eerily mirrored the emotionally charged one Eleanor Jensen had made 9 long years prior. Peterson was visibly surprised, but not entirely shocked, to see the 2 Kentucky detectives on his doorstep. He'd lived with the heavy, suffocating ghost of that violent night for nearly a decade, the memory festering beneath his quiet exterior. Under the skilled, persistent interrogation of Detective Vance, Roy Peterson, now older, worn down, and his bravado eroded by time, finally confessed. He admitted he had confronted Mark just outside O'Malley's that fateful night. He brazenly claimed Mark owed money to his associates, a common, viciously fabricated debt, a standard tactic used to extort money from unsuspecting or vulnerable patrons. Mark, a proud, disciplined soldier, refused to be intimidated, scoffing at the ridiculous claim. An argument quickly escalated, turning volatile. Peterson, in a blind, unthinking fit of pure, unadulterated rage, struck Mark with a heavy, blunt object, which he later identified as a tire iron he habitually kept in the trunk of his battered car for emergencies. He emphatically claimed he didn't mean to kill him, just to teach him a lesson, to scare him into compliance. But Mark fell, his head striking the hard, unforgiving pavement again after the initial blow. Peterson panicked. The cold reality of what he had done slammed into him. He hastily loaded Mark's lifeless body into his trunk, drove to the abandoned auto shop, a place he knew intimately for its isolated anonymity and lack of surveillance, and buried him in a shallow, hastily dug grave amidst the rubble, covering it with old tires, corroded engine parts, and piles of discarded debris. He then immediately fled Louisville, taking advantage of the initial confusion and the military's assumption of AWOL, allowing the local police to dismiss it as a runaway. The confession provided the agonizingly awaited missing pieces, a grim, meticulously woven tapestry of fear, petty greed, and a moment of uncontrolled, brutal violence. Peterson was promptly arrested, formally charged, and extradited back to Kentucky, a symbolic return to the scene of his crime. He eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter, accepting a plea deal to avoid a first-degree murder charge, a compromise necessitated by the substantial passage of time and some unavoidable ambiguities in the forensic evidence surrounding his exact intent. He was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, a sentence that offered a measure of justice, however belated. For Eleanor Jensen, the news of the arrest and subsequent conviction was a victory, but one steeped in an overwhelming, heartbreaking bittersweetness. She had at long last achieved closure, the immutable truth her raw heart had craved for 9 agonizing years. Her beloved son was not a deserter, not a callous runaway, but a victim, brutally murdered. The long, silent vigil was over. She found herself, for the first time in nearly a decade, truly able to grieve, to mourn properly, to finally begin the arduous process of healing. She attended every single court hearing, a silent, dignified sentinel in the gallery, her gaze fixed on the man who had stolen her son's future. The funeral, a solemn, deeply moving ceremony held in her small Ohio town, was attended by military personnel, Mark's few remaining friends, and his extended family. Mark was finally laid to rest with full military honors, his service posthumously reinstated, his name cleared of any lingering blemish of desertion. The flag draped over his coffin was a powerful symbol of his sacrifice and vindication. The humid air of Louisville in the autumn of 2001 still carried the heavy, undeniable weight of its past, its old secrets and untold stories. But for Eleanor, a small, immeasurable part of that crushing weight had been, at long last, lifted. The tragic story of Private Mark Jensen became more than just a cold case. It transformed into a poignant, enduring cautionary tale, a powerful testament to a mother's relentless, unyielding love and the profound, enduring nature of justice, even when it takes almost a decade to painstakingly unearth. The forgotten, overgrown corners of a rapidly changing city held their dark secrets, and sometimes those secrets were, against all odds, eventually brought to light, not by random chance or happenstance, but by the determined, unwavering hands of those who simply refused to let the lost remain forever lost. The chilling, suffocating silence of 9 years had been irrevocably broken, replaced by the solemn, resonant echo of a hard-won truth. The search was finally over, but the scars would remain forever.